Hey everybody, this is Dominic D'Angelo of WrestleZone.com. Today's date is December 4th, 2020, and I'm happy to have with me here today the author of Pain and Passion, History of Stampede Wrestling, Heath McCoy. Heath, thanks for joining me today, man. It's a pleasure to speak with you for the first time.
Thanks very much for having me. Thanks for thinking of me.
Thank you. Yeah, so you wrote this book back in 2005, right?
Yeah.
And so how does it feel like kind of reacquainting yourself with it all, and like the state of wrestling has changed so much even since then. Talk about that, your current relationship with wrestling. Do you have one, or is it more so like just tuning in and out here and there?
Tuning in and out, like I follow it. I more follow it through podcasts, actually. I'm a big fan of Chris Jericho's podcast, and he's always posting about wrestling. You know, he always has podcasts about wrestling and stuff. I don't watch the actual product as much anymore.
Yeah.
And maybe I should, because I know there's some good stuff out there. WWE, I kind of tuned out for a while there.
It's a good move, I think.
I think so too. It just seems so. I mean, it's always been a work, obviously, but it just seems so scripted and so planned now. I love the art of the promo, and I love a good promo. I love a guy that can cut a promo and come out there like Roddy Piper, like Ric Flair, and just fly. And they're genius. They're improv geniuses almost. And now I just feel and Chris Jericho's talked about this on his podcast, actually. It's just so scripted now, and it feels scripted. And it really does. I think it suppresses great talents to do that. And
I think part of it too is like Vince McMahon is so used to having the scripts and having writers, and while there's nothing to an extent, there's nothing wrong with that, and it's not necessarily the writer's fault. But Vince McMahon's mindset of how he approaches wrestling is so archaic, but it's also like out of touch.
Yeah.
So.
The last time I followed WWE really closely. For a while there, I got on the CM Punk train, and I was really on board that. I got excited for a little while there, and then I kind of checked out after that, and it just sporadically in and out since.
Yeah, no,
I'm old school. Stampede.
Yeah, and I think it really speaks to, in the book, the intro to your book really speaks to that too. Like you talked about your relationship and what you liked about it, almost the grittiness and the life that Stampede took on its own and made it stand out in a way. And like characters, all the characters that they had, from Ed Whalen to you name it, there's so many different people. So
it was a really unique promotion.
Absolutely. And I told you off air, like how I was unfamiliar with Stampede so much, but Paul Lazenby recommended the book to me, and I was like, okay, I'll give it a try. And immediately when I read all that intro and stuff like that, I was hooked and I was ready to roll. So it's going to be really cool to touch base with you with it. So
thanks Paul, by the way.
Yeah, right. So let me just start off with this too. Explain your writing background and where you kind of came from in that regard.
Sure. I come from a total journalist background. I wanted to be a rock critic. I'm like a rock and roll guy. I wanted to be a rock critic that was my entry into journalism and everything. And I was, that was my whole goal. But you break into your first newspapers and stuff like that, which I did in the late 90s. You don't get to be a rock critic right off the bat, right? I was doing cops and robbers and crimes and calamities for a number of papers and all this sort of stuff. And I happened to be at the Calgary Herald, actually, as an intern, summer of '99, and that was the summer that Owen Hart died, of course, in Kansas City. I'm the intern. It's a holiday. He died on the Sunday, but it was it was a holiday Monday. We're doing the follow up on it, sort of thing. Nobody else is in the newsroom because all the senior reporters are gone, so they send the intern over to the Hart House, and it was so surreal for me to go there because I grew up watching Stampede Wrestling in the early 80s was my heyday for watching it. Mm-hmm. So going to the Hart House, and then I followed the careers of, Bret and Dynamite and Davey Boy and all these guys as they went to the WWF as well. So I was such a fan of this world. And so going to the Hart House, as a reporter to cover this serious, tragic news story, it was so surreal for me. It was just a surreal experience for me. I went in there and I feel, because I was a wrestling fan, because I kind of knew about the Harts, and I knew a little bit about their world, I stood out from a lot of the other journalists, because journalists came from all over the world that day. That was the biggest, when Owen Hart died, that was the biggest news story in the world that day.
Oh yeah, I remember as a kid just being there and watching.
Yeah, Calgary, Alberta, and people were coming in like from the, Good Morning America was flying somebody in, and it was a huge deal. And I think I stood out from a lot of the other journalists that were there, just because I wasn't just coming into this as just another reporter. Like, I kind of knew something about their world. And so, and this was an ongoing story, of course. I mean, for months and years afterwards, that, you know, as the Hart family suing McMahon and all this, and the WWE. And I'm following the story and just following the trials and tribulations of the Hart family and everything that's happening to Brett. And it kind of became my little pet story there at the Herald. And I just, the family, kind of members of the family at least, kind of came to trust me and know me. And I got to know them, and we talked, and I just thought, like, wow, this is something I have to write about. This is an epic story. You know, this should be a movie.
Yeah. It lends itself to it too, with all the like we mentioned, all the characters and different people that run in and out, come in and out through it, and that Stu influenced in so many ways too. With, you know, it's just amazing, like running through the names when I'm like turning the page and seeing like who else stopped by, who else was there. Yeah, it's, the list is like unfathomable, and it's just like the impact that he's had on the industry in general. It's like, and his love for the business too, it obviously came into such a huge situation, like with his relationships with Helen and everything like that. It's such a
I mean, again, it goes back to this is a real drama, you know, like, remember the movie The Wrestler there? You didn't have to be a wrestling fan to get into that movie, because it was just such an amazing movie and an amazing drama and amazing human story. And that's what was going on in the Hart family and with Stampede Wrestling. I mean, you had this, Stu loved the business and he wanted to be a part of it, and he was born to be in that business, you know, and it was fired everything that he wanted to do. And then you had a Helen, who was his, you know, she was the right hand of that business. She was handling all the business aspects.
Yeah, the financials and everything.
Doing the books, and she hated it. And it's kind of a tragedy of the you know, like a hidden little tragedy. It didn't actually come out till years later. She just hated it so much that she became like developed an alcohol problem up there in the office, working away. And over the years, like, when, you know, there'd be high times when Stampede Wrestling was doing really well, but there'd also be a lot of dips when they had no money and they could barely get by. And she'd be begging Stu year after year, time after time, let's get out of this business. Let's get out of this business. So lots of drama there.
It's like, you know, there's seen moments where it would happen, and then the other times, like, you know, it's like The Godfather. Once you get out, they pull you back in, kind of thing.
Man, I'm glad you said that, because there's two comparisons I always make with the book. I say it's The Godfather of wrestling, and it's The Boogie Nights of wrestling.
Yeah, that's oh my gosh. Yeah.
I can get in either one. The Godfather comparisons, because, you know, you've got this family. Stu and Helen had 12 kids, 8 boys, all sucked into the wrestling business one way or another, and 4 girls who also work, because they married wrestlers, you know.
Yeah.
Often not have very happy relationships. And you know, there's this family drama that ensues, and it's all based around this kind of crazy family business, like, and not mafioso, like in the case of Godfather, but the wrestling business. And there's got all these colorful characters that come through, and there's battles behind the scenes, and so
treachery, you know, all this stuff, deceit.
Yeah,
it's like,
and then the Boogie Nights comparison is because I always look at it like, you know, in Boogie Nights, at the beginning of Boogie Nights, even though the porn industry's, you know, it's a shady business still, but it's kind of like a family. There's a happiness to it. It works. And then when it becomes more corporate, when it becomes big industry, then suddenly everybody gets into drugs, and it tears the family apart, and everybody goes down a real bad path. And I see that happening. I see a similarity with the Hart family and their Stampede Wrestling business, actually. You know, when it was just a territorial family thing, they had their conflicts, and it was still a crazy business, but they loved it, and it was a family dynamic. And then when, you know, the WWF buys them out, and they, you know, some people go to the WWF and some stay behind, and there's all this resentment and animosity, and, you know, people get into steroids, and it tears the family apart in a similar way, culminating with, you know, Owen. So.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And, you know, it's funny too, because like, I didn't even think about this, but I'm in the midst of Bret Hart's book, and he brings up the moment, like he's like a younger guy at this point, but he goes with Stu to meet with all the heads of the promotions. And he mentions The Godfather, like, and it's like, you think of that Don Corleone scene and everything like that. It's just like, wow. Yeah. Wow, man. So yeah, I want to start to talk just from Stu's perspective in general. Like, and in the book, it's conveyed so much how big of a figure he is in Calgary.
Mm-hmm.
Does his legacy still stand strong there? And what is the impact ultimately did he have on the city, like even to this point?
City of Calgary. There's a lasting impact. Like he's a cultural figure here and a historical figure. When he started his wrestling promotion here in 1951, Calgary was very much kind of a one-horse town. We were known for having our rodeo, so there was that rodeo culture, and there was an oil boom happening, but it was just starting. I mean, it still had that one. So people were getting rich, but there was still that small town mentality sort of thing. There wasn't a lot going on. We didn't have the Calgary Flames. We had a Canadian CFL football team.
Yep.
But there wasn't a lot of nightlife. One-horse town. So when he came here, started up the TV shows, started doing, the Friday night wrestling shows on the Calgary Stampede grounds. That was such a big part of the culture here that, from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, that was just a huge ongoing part of the culture. I used to watch wrestling with my grandpa because he watched it when he was younger, and my dad watched it. And it was like a generational thing. I used to play Stampede wrestling at recess. Like it had such an impact. You pick your favorite Hart brother and you play Stampede wrestling at recess. Like there was such a cultural impact about it. And then as well, Stu Hart was a real active figure within Calgary too. Like when he had the means, he was very charitable. He contributed to all sorts of charities. At the high times for him and Helen, I mean, he was rubbing elbows with sort of the blue-eyed sheiks of Calgary. He was a real, the mayors knew him, everybody knew him, the media followed the exploits of the Hart family. So, and then Brett and Owen go on to this world fame too. So, very much an impact.
Absolutely. And something else too, just his being a father. I thought one of the neat aspects about Stu that I did not expect, because his youth, his growing up, he was it was very, very rough, extremely rough.
Basically rough. People don't even realize how rough it was. He lived in a tent on a prairie landscape, on a frozen prairie landscape for 2 years. It's almost unbelievable, but it happened. And
the relationship with his dad, it was so different from the relationships he had with his kids because how much he invested into them. And I thought such a neat aspect of him was him almost kind of being the Susie homemaker in a lot of ways.
What?
Into, the cooking, the cleaning, the knitting, anything the kids need, he would be doing it while Helen would be the financial mindset of the whole bit.
Totally. And it was weird because on one hand you got this dad, because we all know about the dungeon and him training the wrestlers and training down there. So one minute there's by night there's screams coming up from the dungeon where he's literally torturing people, and then in the day when he's not on the road, obviously he's this loving, caring dad taking his kids to school, but he's also there was a big industrial kitchen in the Hart house, and he was the cook. He was in there cooking, and he would do Helen and I think the girls too. He would do their hair and their nails. Yeah. The side of him that you wouldn't expect this guy, this brute of a man would do that. But yeah. And he loved opulence too. Like the Hart house, it was really opulent when you when you go into it, and if before you pick up the smell of cat urine sort of
that's what I hear.
Permeated the place, and it was filthy too. But when you first walk in there, you get that first glance. There's these beautiful Persian rugs and beautiful chandeliers. Because he came up from such a low kind of place, he wanted this opulence. He kind of longed for that.
Yeah.
But then he had this other side of him that was, that let it go, let the cats run the place,
Yeah. I think that was a really neat aspect of it too, the appreciation that he had for animals, and then a lot of you can see that even when Brett wrote his book, how much they included them in the family too, whether it was the bear, the wrestling bear, or the cow that they had too, and all that stuff. Let's talk about Helen now too, and just her personality coming from it, and how did obviously they loved each other, and they had but wrestling threw a wedge in some of that too sometimes. But talk about how she kind of kept certain things together when it came to Stu and the family in regards, if that makes sense.
She was Helen, I mean, I guess I could just address this. They complemented each other in so many ways. Like, he was this brute of a guy, but at the same time, and he lived and breathed wrestling, but at the same time, he had this domestic side, and they needed that domestic side. She was sort of a cultured New York lady that grew up, I don't know if well-to-do, but pretty well, I think well-to-do, actually.
Affluent, yeah.
Yeah, affluent. And she, her dad had been an Olympic athlete and stuff like that. And she, and New York gal, and, her mom wanted to marry a doctor or a lawyer. She was very smart. And so she had, so they bounced each other out that way. I don't know if I'm answering your question there or not. Have I gone off track?
No, you are. You're very much, yeah. No,
yeah.
It's very on point.
She did. They both held the family together. I wouldn't put that just on Helen. Like, I think she did. They both meant a lot. They both meant a lot to their kids, and the kids were sort of jockey for position for the parents' love, which is another whole angle.
That's another thing. Well. That's another thing. And like Bruce, I think about Bruce a lot because like he was when she was pregnant, they had the car accident, and he was, he was in there, So she had a special relationship with Bruce in a lot of ways. Like it was
always felt that Bruce
do no wrong. It seemed in a lot of ways.
This is the way the other, not Bruce, but the way some of the other Hart kids related to me. Actually, yeah, that Bruce was Mom's favorite sort of thing, and not Stu's favorite. Bruce is the one that had the ambitions to kind of run Stampede Wrestling into the next generation. Mm-hmm. He had big ideas for it, and some really great ideas too. And then some bad ideas too. But his dad didn't like his ideas a lot of the time, so they were always butting heads about it. And Bruce was, from what I'm told, Mom's favorite. He was Helen's favorite because she almost lost him as during birth and all that sort of stuff because of the accident you mentioned.
Yeah.
So he could kind of work. He had it wrapped around his finger, so he would go to Helen and get her to manipulate Stu for him. And he got a lot by Stu, I think, because of that love that, that really special relationship he had with Helen. Yeah. So there's another, back to the Godfather thing. You got this crazy family dynamic with all these different kids, and how they play off Mom and Dad,
And Stu seemed to really take to his daughters in a lot of ways. I don't know if he had a certain favorite boy that stood out, but you can definitely see a lot of the appreciation that he had for Brett, Owen, and everything like that. Is there a certain one that really stands out to you that maybe he had a special connection with out of everybody?
Hard to say. Like, it's funny because all of the kids come up at one point. So I think I was Dad's favorite. I think I was Dad's favorite because they've got that competition,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have told me that Owen was a special favorite for him.
Yeah.
And maybe because you're baby of the family thing as well. But Owen was a favorite. I think he always had a lot of respect for Brett. I wouldn't say he disrespected Bruce necessarily. Some of the brothers and sisters might disagree with that, but he butted heads. He disagreed with Bruce a lot, and they butted heads.
Yeah.
It's sort of it's sort of a tragedy for Bruce almost, because he's the one who really wanted to take the business, and
all about it. Yeah. And he has those ideas.
Some of the brothers, he really seemed to, I know he didn't always love Wayne, who was a referee, and Wayne had a bit of a hippie in him, and Stu didn't like that.
Oh, really?
And then Smith, the older brother, was sort of a bit of a ne'er-do-well. He's passed on now, so you don't want to talk bad about,
yeah, I get it.
But there's so many Smith stories, and Stu, his nickname for him was Shed, which is short for shithead.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, and you talk about that in the book and that relationship too. And it's like, it seemed like there was a lot going on, where Smith would do some things and like Stu would try to correct them, or it's still look out for, because it's his son. And so he, still look out for him and try to make things right. But also there would be certain things that just like, that's Smith, that's Smith's doing.
Yeah.
Who he is. So, yeah. So somebody else that I think almost kind of really stole the show in the book was Ed Whalen, who I was not very familiar with too much, but like hearing his personality and who he was. It's such a fascinating dynamic, that the relationship that he had with Stu, and also kind of being against like the blood and guts kind of violence aspect of wrestling in general, but he added legitimacy to the whole product too.
Big time. He was very much, in many ways, the star of the show for decade after decade after decade. And he was a legitimate newscaster. He was a news personality in Calgary, and then later he became the voice of the Calgary Flames as well. So he really had a legitimacy in Calgary, and he was a big wig at the station, obviously, as well.
Yeah.
Where so he had some clout and some pull over what was going to air and what was not going to air. And yeah, a very close relationship with Stu. And then he butted heads with Bruce as well later on, sometimes with Stu as well, because he wanted it to be family entertainment. He wanted it to be nice family entertainment. So when it got too bloody, when it got too over the top, he would fight that stuff. He says, that's not going to air on TV. We're going to cut that short. And the wrestlers hated that, right? Because some of the best matches then didn't get on TV. Or if he didn't like a certain wrestler, he had a real rapport with wrestlers too, with certain wrestlers. But if he didn't like you as a wrestler, he wouldn't, you take the mic away, wouldn't let you talk.
Yeah, he wouldn't give you that heat.
yeah, they hated that about him, But he was the fans loved him, and because he was such a Calgary personality, and he had this Stampede Wrestling had this sort of Western charm sort of thing, this down home Western charm, and Ed Whalen epitomized this. He had a sort of a hokey charm to him that flew at that time in Calgary, right? And so these kind of hokey sayings, like a great match was a ring-a-ding-dong dandy.
Oh, that's right.
Right? Yeah, a great match is a ring-a-ding-dong dandy, or two guys, there's two guys collide or really get into it in the ring. It's a malfunction at the junction.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. He had his patent of that's it for another edition of Stampede Wrestling. Bye now. It's just that sort of thing that made people love him at the time. And also the rapport he had with the wrestlers, close relationship with the Hart family. Yeah, the wrestlers would come and go back in the territory days, right? Abdullah the Butcher would come and go.
Yeah.
Even Archie the Stomper would come and go. All these guys would come and go. The Harts were the mainstays, and Ed Whalen was the mainstay,
Yeah. And I to that point too, I think he really defined, from what it seemed, like that connection with the fans, where he was the voice of reason. He spoke for the fans, it seemed, in a lot of ways. And they had that the fans had that relationship and connection with Ed. And that always makes a wrestling product so much stronger too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's see. Yeah. So we kind of mentioned this a little bit, like just his adversity towards the blood and extreme violence and everything that came with it. I think one of the standout moments was like the Bad News Brown situation that happened a couple of times.
That was you want me to talk about that?
Talk about it. Yeah, delve into it. Yeah.
December 2nd, 1983, I think. It was and it was just a Bruce Hart concept. It shows that he had a good mind for the business in a lot of ways. But it was like a War of the Worlds situation. You know how Orson Welles' War of the Worlds?
Yep.
This fiction perpetrated on the public that it goes so over that everybody believes it, and it causes this mass hysteria. This is what happened with the Bad News Allen situation, because I know him as Bad News Allen. Stampede
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, he was Bad News Allen, and he was like the terrifying for me as a youth. When I interviewed him, I still had it in my head as a 30-year-old man. Like, I'm terrified of this guy from when I was a kid. Like, he was a terrifying heel. He was this big, intimidating kind of black power presence, angry all the time, and just a scary guy, and so he was just unstoppable. Destroyed Dynamite Kid, destroyed Bret Hart. He was the monster heel of his era. And then they brought in the monster heel of the last generation, who was Archie the Stomper Goldie from the 70s. They brought him in, and the concept was to kind of pit them against each other, like kind of King Kong versus Godzilla. But first he was genius promoting. First they brought him in as tag team partners. And with them, Stomper brought his son. It wasn't really
the quote unquote
this kid they brought in to be Jeff Goldie, and this is my son, and I'm breaking him into the business, my young green son. And so at one point there, they have a 6-man tag: Bret Hart, Davey Boy Smith, and this Japanese wrestler who they're passing off as a First Nations wrestler, Sonny Two Rivers, he was called, I believe, against Archie the Stomper Goldie, Bad News Allen, and Jeff Goldie. And at one point in the match, Bad News Allen, I can't remember why he thought Archie was jealous of him or something like that, but at one point in the match, he basically stabs Archie in the back. Another heel comes, and he knocks him over the head, knocks him out. Another heel comes in, and they tie him up in the corner. Archie proceeds to take young green Jeff Goldie outside of the ring and pile drive him on the cement and, supposedly break his neck.
Yeah.
And it was amazing, but the crowd went, there was a riot. There was a riot in the crowd. The Victoria Pavilion rioted. And because people were so angry at Bad News Allen and freaked out by this. And I think an old man hit Bad News Allen with his cane, and Allen actually grabbed him and throttled him and everything. And because of this, the media lost their minds. The wrestling's gone too far. Wrestling's gone out of control. And the Boxing and Wrestling Commission took away Stu's license, and they brought down fines on Stu. They brought down fines on Bad News Allen. And Ed Whalen, probably because the Hearts knew he would have kiboshed the whole thing. They didn't clue him in that they were going to do this. So he was horrified by the whole thing too. And at the end, Bad News Allen comes out and does this big, crazy interview taunting the Stomper, while a riot's happening in the background. He's taunting the Stompers. I crippled your son. I helped him to die. And then at last interview of the night, it's Archie the Stomper Goldie and Ed Whalen. The Victoria Pavilion's cleared out. It's just the two of them. Rings all dark. There's just a light and it was beautifully done. And Archie the Stomper's usually ranting and raving as well. He does this somber interview talking about how he's he has all this regret that he brought his son into the business and now the kid's crippled. But then in the end, I'm going to get you, Bad News Allen. And it just should have been so perfect. But it wasn't perfect because, because of all the, the media losing their mind and all this hysteria and everything. Actually, it became this kind of shackle that kind of helped bring him down. I can't remember if he lost his TV license, Stu, for a time, or
I think he did. If I remember, I think he did. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
there's an example of how Ed Whalen had sway over the thing, because Ed Whalen left the show after that. He said, I'm disgusted by this. I can't be part of this anymore. He walked off the show on the air. It was almost like a mic drop. I think after he was done with Archie, I think he hung his mic over the rope sort of thing. He said, I'm out of here. And he left. He was gone. And that's another thing too. He had such legitimacy in Calgary that that helped the media buy into the whole thing too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it really did hurt Stampede Wrestling. And it should have been this brilliant angle that actually, made
I was like, man, this is, when I was reading the book, I was like, man, this would have been such a payoff ultimately, like Archie.
Should have been. Should have been. Yeah.
It was like beautifully done. Following up, I guess, like with Bruce, I thought a neat aspect that I was not aware of was the incorporation of music that he had into the product.
Yeah.
I thought that was really fascinating because, ECW gets that reputation of like really putting music, but Bruce seemed like he was one of the pioneers to do that. He
was one of the pioneers. I wouldn't say he was the only guy, because I think they were doing it in Texas and they were doing it other places, but Bruce was smart enough. It wasn't done in Stampede Wrestling before, and it wasn't done widely in wrestling as far as I know.
At that point,
one of the first guys. Yeah. It's funny though, because he did start, it was before we knew too much about licensing, I think, as well, because who was it? I think it was maybe Davey Boy Smith came out to Eye of the Tiger. I don't know if Survivor got any money for that, right? And the Cuban Assassin would come out to
man,
I can't remember, but it was a popular song anyway.
Yeah, no, because I remember reading
songs they were using.
Yeah.
Bruce was a pioneer. Bruce had a pioneering thought in many ways. That he had some good ideas and some bad ideas, but yeah, he was really taking it into the future. But he couldn't have predicted what the future was going to hold, which was the WWF would change the whole landscape, right?
Yeah, and kind of it seemed like to really, really screw up his plans of kind of forwarding Stampede Wrestling, because he later on too, when it WWE scooped everything, went global and nationwide and all that stuff. It ended up being Bruce would still keep wanting to go back to the well of Stampede, whether it was like dying on the vine or not kind of thing, it seemed, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, he was the one that was not willing to let it go. He wanted to, even until the 2000s, there was moments where he tried to revamp it, he didn't want to let the dream go. He kept thinking, we can do this and we can forge ahead with this, with or without a TV license. But it just became so hard how hard it is to do for the
Oh my gosh, yeah. If you're putting on a show or promoting or anything like that, and not having that without a TV license is super tough.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So somebody else that really stood out was Dynamite Kid, and not only from a Stampede Wrestling point, but a full industry standpoint, at how much he's changed the style of the business and the way younger, smaller wrestlers worked, and certainly a person before his time. Like if he was here today, like, personality notwithstanding, he could be a super major like star, and was a major star.
Yeah.
But,
he's simply revolutionary. Yeah.
Yes. Talk about let's see. Just his impact on Stampede, but also how his attitude really kind of like clashed against his like further like developing himself as a star.
Sure, because he did shoot himself in the foot in his life.
Yeah,
he very much did. Tragedy. He revolutionized the business ultimately, but he revolutionized Stampede Wrestling. Stampede Wrestling was going through a real low point in the 77, 78 sort of thing. That was another one of the times when Stu was just about to fold it. He was about to throw in the towel, sell it to another, other promoters. Helen was saying, this is the time, Stu, let's get out of here.
Yeah.
And if you look at the cards in like 76, 75, they were not great cards, right? You could tell he was suffering, struggling to get by. And when the Dynamite Kid came along, Bruce discovered him. Bruce, he was on a tour of England sort of thing, and saw this scrawny little kid just be so explosive in the ring. Like the way he wrestled, he was so agile and so high flying, and so reckless too. Like the way the flying headbutts off the turnbuckle and stuff like that, stuff we had never seen before. And the way he was willing to put his body on the line, like you felt everything that he did. He was like Spider-Man to me when I was a kid. I couldn't cheer for him when I was a kid because he was a heel most of the time. So I couldn't admit to myself how much I was enamored with this guy, how in awe I was of him until finally he did do the turn. But he came and, Bruce saw him and said, hey, I can bring this guy. This guy could do great things for Dad's business back home. And I think Bruce was also thinking, I'm a little guy, he's a little guy, we can work together and he'll make me look great.
Right.
But he was also thinking, this guy's amazing and he's going to do great things for the business. And so somehow he convinced Stu, because Stu was into big men. So somehow he convinced Stu to bring him. And the first thing Stu said to him, supposedly, when he came into the Calgary dressing room was like, you're a scrawny little bastard, aren't you? Like he had no use for the guy, but he turned it around very quickly. Because the minute Stu saw him wrestle and what he could do in the ring, Stu became a believer, and the fans became a believer, and the business started to pick up again, and it reinvigorated the entire promotion. And I think Bret Hart that's around the time Bret Hart was getting into the business too.
Yeah,
and I think he even kind of alludes to this in his book. He was getting into the business, but he didn't have great ambitions to be a wrestler yet. I think he wanted to go to film school.
Very much in that level of like.
Yeah, it was just sort of, Dad's bringing me into the business. I'm going to be a referee for a little while, or I'm going to just wrestle on shows at the bottom of cards or whatever, and wrestle in Saskatoon and Regina here and then. But then once the Dynamite Kid came along, I think that's when Bret really saw like it kind of inspired Bret, like this is what it can be like in the ring. I want to work with this guy, and that's kind of when Bret got inspired and wanted to be a wrestler and started to really take it seriously, I think too.
Yeah, and I think it further, because I remember like the moment like when they first kind of ran into each other, worked with each other. Like Dynamite Kid did not like Bret, and like laid his nose, everything like that. Yeah, and it really motivated a rivalry that ended up being like friendly, but also like controversial and clashing with one another.
Yeah, they became like brothers. Like I think Bret, all the Harts really regarded it, as much as he could be a bastard, Dynamite could. The Harts took to him though, but partly because he did such great things for the business, but partly because I think they were all inspired by him and awe of him, and they kind of treated him like a brother, right? But yeah, I mean, first he had that attitude, he had that bullying mentality, and he had Bret and all the brothers always say he's got like a little man mentality too, right? Like he felt little, he felt like he knew he was a shrimp, so he wanted to be extra tough to make up for it. He kind of took on this bullying, nasty, aggressive persona. And he was raised pretty badly too. Like his boxer, they used to
really, really tough too.
Yeah, it came from a very tough upbringing. But yeah, first thing he did with Bret in the ring was break his nose. He thought, because I think he thought, promoter's son, who are you? You've no experience under your belt. I'm gonna show you. I'm
gonna show you what
Bret held his own. Bret held his own, and then and got his respect. And then they became. But yeah, and that you talked about how the Dynamite Kid sort of shot himself in the foot ultimately, and he did because he he had this recklessness. He would put his body on the line. He would do stuff to his body he never should have. And he had that small mentality. And I think he had to in a way, because they were going, especially when they went to the WWF.
Yep.
That time, small men were not going to go anywhere then, right? So he had to bulk up the way he did. So, he got super, but he did this in the Stampede even. He got super into the juice, So
it was Junkyard Dog, I think, introduced him, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great story. But yeah, he beat up his body. He took the juice to the next level. It's funny. And then he also, got into the partying, drinking and drugging lifestyle as well. So really by the late, even the end of his WWF run, like he was done. He was shot, and his body, and he wound up, I think by the mid 90s, I think he was in a wheelchair and no chance of wrestling again. And if you look at his final matches, I think they were in Japan. Like he's just a shell of his former self.
Yeah.
It's sad to see, but he did that to himself. He destroyed himself.
It's just like, yeah, you putting like not thinking, having the forethought to like kind of, okay, I got to protect myself. But it's like, yeah, what you said too, like almost like the little man, that Napoleon complex where you have to prove yourself because you're in a business with big men and gigantic people that are gonna that are gonna take that spotlight away from you, and you have to stand out in some form or fashion. And that was his way of handling it. And plus you mix it all in. It is a really like tragic, sad aspect of wrestling. I think he really defines that in a lot of ways, because you look at what people, how invested they get into it, but then also how it ultimately destroys them too.
Yeah. He had that bullying sort of aspect behind the scenes, like in the dressing room. He really threw the bully thing out there and the tough guy thing. And he was fearless. Like he got in the face of David Schultz once, who was a way bigger man. Yeah. He got, back in the dressing room, and lots of guys through Stampede he would mix it up with. And then and the kind of the mean, really mean, nasty ribs and everything. And that culminated to what happened with the Rougeaus in the WWE.
Right, where his teeth got knocked out, right?
Yeah, and that was a big thing that led to his decline too. It was almost like his body was starting to deteriorate on him at that point anyway, but also like it was a huge confidence destroyer for him too, because he was the tough guy, and so suddenly, for the first time, he sort of got knocked off his perch, and he never really came back from that, from what I understand.
Yeah, no, it seemed like that was like kind of the beginning of the end for him in regards to like having that confidence. Somebody else that had a very strong connection with Dynamite was J.R. Foley.
Oh man, I love J.R. Foley.
Talk about that and how he kind of like his character and persona super much changed from when he entered Stampede.
Oh yeah, it was bizarre. This is the kind of thing that came largely from the mind of Bruce Hart, I think too, and others contributed to it, including Foley. But it's something I think it only could have blossomed in Stampede wrestling at that time. Yeah, he came. He was, he didn't look like it. He had the pot belly and kind of skinny arms and everything, but he had been a real tough guy. He'd been a real shooter in England, and he had a long career. But by the time he came to Calgary, he was getting to be an old man, and it was the end of his career sort of thing, and wasn't exactly electrifying the fans. He was there in that kind of lame, really bad time, mid-'70s era for Stampede. John Foley, just another English wrestler sort of thing. But he always had this sort of cocky, brash, obnoxious attitude, And I think Bruce or whoever thought, we can do something with this guy. And it's late 70s. The big TV show at the time, Revolution, huge show on TV was in Dallas. Yeah. And if you remember, there was a character, J.R. Ewing.
J.R. Ewing.
The evil oil tycoon, right? and so they came up with this angle where John Foley came into all this money, inherited all this money. So now he's going to become the evil millionaire manager, and he's going to have the Foley army and all this kind of stuff. It's kind of $1 Million Man before there was $1 Million Man. And it's funny because he was more like a hobo, really, in some ways. But he'd come to the ring like this. He was J.R. Foley. All of a sudden, the millionaire manager, he'd wear a yacht hat and have his cane and be dressed up and everything. But then they kind of incorporate this other weird angle where he's part J.R. Ewing and then part Adolf Hitler, because they give him the Hitler mustache, which I think started as a rib. I think one time on the bus, they kind of just, maybe Dynamite or somebody shaved like a Hitler mustache on him, and he kept it. Yeah. And he stayed Hitler. So he's this bizarre hybrid of J.R. Ewing and Adolf Hitler. Like, it's so nutty. Like it just would never work anywhere else. I don't think you could pitch that to anybody in like Vince's office. You know, they'd be like, "This is insane. This will never work." But in the Stampede Wrestling, in that context, it absolutely worked, and he was hilarious. And him and Dynamite played off each other perfectly. Like he kind of did become a father figure to Dynamite in and out of the ring. Dynamite did these insanely nasty ribs to him. But they were still tight, you know.
Yeah, because you could tell. Yeah, you could tell that he loved them. Like, and ultimately,
they did love each other. Yeah, they were. It was like a father figure to him. Speaking of, like, here's the perfect example of an insanely nasty, potentially dangerous rib, Dynamite Kid rib. And this was to the guy he loved. This is to J.R. Foley. But they all knew that Foley was kind of a drunk, for one thing. And he loved to go on the can and have a smoke. He always loved to. And then he'd drop the smoke between his legs, you know, thing, and you know, get off the can. So they put like lighter fluid or something inside the toilet one time. And he did that. I mean, and there was like explosion, and they could have blown his nuts off.
Yeah, right.
How is that funny? But somehow and I guess Foley was okay with it because he didn't leave the territory or anything.
Nothing like that.
Yeah. So yeah,
no, he was a fascinating character. Like the ribs that came into play. I might get the name wrong, but my favorite prank, and you really focused on this one, was it the Darlene? Was that her name? The one where they'd take the like Mad Dog Vachon got involved. I remember. I can't remember the name of the woman that they introduced.
I can't remember either. Oh man, sorry. I didn't
something.
That is one of the ultimate ribs. I should have gone back on that. Have you ever seen the movie Porky's?
No, I've never seen that.
I swear to God, they recreate that rib in Porky's somehow because there's a prostitute that's going to meet all these guys and take care of all these guys, all the wrestlers out in the bush, and then somehow like a cop comes in or an angry boyfriend comes in or something, and everybody scatters. Yeah. So, am I getting it wrong? I think that's what happened in Stampede Wrestling.
Because like it would be like, hey, you gotta meet Darlene. She like wants to meet all the new wrestlers, everything, but you gotta bring a friend for her, and you also have to like she'll bring. It's gonna be a big dinner, everything like that. And sure enough, they like show up. And then, like, her husband comes in, and then shoots the one guy in on the job. Like, I think it was Mad Dog that got shot. And, like, they were, like...
Right! Yeah. Somebody started firing his shots, right?
I don't know
all the wrestlers scatter.
Was it Antonio? The Great
Antonio.
Yeah. I think it was the Great Antonio. I can't remember, but he was involved in one of the ribs of that. And, like, I remember him, like, getting crashing through the mud and all that stuff.
Yeah, and he ran and he was a big man. He was like, that's the most healthy guy. And I think he ran miles and miles and miles through the mud and the prairie and everything from wherever these guys went out to meet Darlene or whoever it was.
Yeah.
And then he found out that it was it was just
it was all bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I guess I want to talk about the Hearts just in relationship, and your connection with them. Like, talk about like I guess the dynamic between. Let's start. Just like Bruce and ultimately like his relationship with Brett, and also coming into play with like Owen too. I guess how much of that like did they clash in a lot of ways? Because I know Brett, there'd be times where Brett seemed like the checks to the balances in a lot of ways when it would come to like kind of leveling everything out, but like Bruce ultimately had his own intentions too, so they combated a lot, it seemed.
Yeah, always did. And even before Vince McMahon came into the scene, like even back in the days when it was just a territorial thing, Bruce had his ideas, how he wanted to run things. Stu hated it. Brett would usually back his dad. I think Keith would usually back his dad. Ross was sort of Switzerland. He was sort of neutral, but he was in there. But he did believe in Bruce a lot more so than some of the others did. So there's always this sort of rivalry going on between all of them. Then it gets super heightened when Vince McMahon comes along, brings some of the boys to the WWE with them, and they get to go on to stardom, or at least a shot at stardom. And some do not. Bruce, who wanted to have these grand visions, gets shut out of that essentially, at least not in the way he wanted to be. I think they had some behind the scenes plans for him, but he didn't want anything to do with it. So, that creates more of a tension between him and Brett. And so that amped up over the years. And then it really came to this awful, terrible head when Owen died. And Brett and Stu and Helen and Owen's widow Martha were suing Vince McMahon and the WWE, and half the family didn't want that. They wanted to almost screw behind the scenes. They wanted to sabotage the whole thing almost, and they do. It wasn't just for selfish reasons. Sometimes they make it out to be because, they so-and-so still wanted Jim Neidhart to be able to work and Davey Boy Smith to be able to work, and that was part of the thinking behind it. Or Bruce wanted Stampede Wrestling to be reborn as sort of a training
facility. Yeah, almost like a
for WWE and stuff. There was some of that thinking behind it, but it was tearing Stu and Helen apart. They were near the end of their life, and they didn't want to be locked in this, this could have gone on for years and years and years. They didn't want to spend their last days locked in this lawsuit with the WWE. They kind of wanted out of it too, and the kids saw this is destroying our parents. So they tried to sabotage it from within. But you could see why Martha wanted to sue and get her day in court and get her justice as well. It was just an ugly, tragic scenario. But I hope that answers your question.
No, it did.
There, but yeah.
I think in a lot of ways too, like you did a very good job at the end of the book balancing the perspective from both camps, like from not only Martha's standpoint from her book, which you did combat back a little bit about what she had to say about some of the family members in that.
I don't think she was ultimately particularly kind the way she treated Owen's family.
Yeah, it seemed like a lot of it was like kind of mean-spirited and unnecessary, and maybe just bitter to the fact of like passing of her husband and everything like that.
And who can fault her for that though? Who can blame her for having that axe to grind? Like, I mean,
right. Right. Ultimately, how would you describe probably your the relationship you formed with the Harts over the course of that time, from when you started like covering the Owen situation to ultimately how everything all panned out?
It depends. It depends on the time frame. It depends on the family member. Like Bruce was the one that inspired me first. Owen's death and covering that whole story, I thought, wow, this has got to be a book. This is an amazing book. But I just pictured a book on on the death of Owen Hart himself at first. It was actually, I just did like a 3.5 hour interview with Bruce one day. Like I just sort of sat down with him and turned on the recorder, and we just kept going and going and going. He told me the family story. And I thought, man, this is incredible. Like this is what inspired me, that I have to write this book.
Yeah.
More than anything else. But then as I started doing the project, when I was interviewing other people that maybe Bruce didn't agree with, whatever, Bruce shut me out after a while, and I think ultimately I don't think he's ever said a good word about my book. I think I don't think he was, particularly happy with the way he came across in it. Although I think he comes across like a valued member of the whole history.
Like a big figure in the book too, positive and negative. It's just, I thought it was very well balanced. Yeah.
I have a lot of respect for Bruce and what he brought to the business. And then I think that, some of the other ones totally embraced me and brought me, like Ross was super helpful and shared a lot with me. I think I was a pain in his ass a lot of the time. I kept bugging him. Usually he would indulge me though. And then Brett was a busy guy, and Brett was working on his own book as well. And Brett gave me some time, but it was hard to nail him down for time as well, But then later he became a real fan of the book, and he said nice things about it, and even wrote he wrote something on one of the editions and everything, that he endorsed it and thought it was a great book. And Jim Neidhart's wife, Ellie Neidhart, one of the Hart sisters, she phoned me up and screamed at me for 2 hours when the book came out.
She was a fire plug, it seemed too.
Yeah, and she didn't like the way that her husband came across in it and stuff. And I can see it's a touchy situation for everybody. Most of the Harts seem to embrace it and like it and get behind it though.
Yeah. So, yeah. No, I thought, like I told you, I think it was very well balanced and gave a clear cut, like journalistic perspective of it, but also incorporated that storytelling aspect of like just lending it to like what the situation was, organic in itself, like all these different characters and people coming into play. And I thought it was a beautifully well balanced book. I really, really enjoyed it. And that's why I wanted to get you on here, because I think you're very welcome. But now, you do mention Brett's book at the end, because at this point it wasn't published. Brett was working on it, like you just said. Ultimately, what did you think of Bret Hart's book? And I think they're great companion pieces with one another, too.
And a lot of people have said that. I felt mixed feelings about Bret Hart's book, because of course I was intimidated by it, and I was like, oh, I wish you weren't writing a book, man, because you know that I'm not going to outsell Bret Hart. Like, people are going to buy his book, and everybody knows who he is. Nobody knows who I am. So my book's I got to really work to get my book out there. But a lot of people did say they were good companion pieces. It meant the world to me when he actually thought it was a good book and kind of got behind it and supported it. But I thought his book was great. I thought he really told a comprehensive story. Our books are different, because my book is the story of the Hart family and the Stampede Wrestling promotion.
Yes.
Whereas his book is just about him.
Yeah.
But he does get into a lot of the same stuff, obviously, because he's a Hart and he was part of the Stampede Wrestling promotion, and that's his family. But no, I think his book is great. Yeah, I'm a big fan.
And
I've read it a few times.
Yeah, and to your point, yeah, I'm on my second read through. But to your point, like, your book is very much, focused on the Stampede aspect of it, and the Stu Hart. Like, I got so wrapped up with Stu Hart's story and like his connection with Helen, and I thought all that stuff and learning like almost the foundation of this patriarch family that's like growing out and being this kind of almost royalty for Calgary, it seemed, in Canada. And,
yeah, totally.
And I think that, and like, because Bret really, I like his book starts off like it does cover Stampede and stuff like that, but you go into all the little details and tell so much different things about the people that were involved with it too, that I just think it's they're great one-in-one pieces with one another.
His book is totally personal too, whereas a lot of people say, like, I have my personal feelings about stuff within the business, but for the most part, my book is pretty depersonalized, right? I'm just I talked to everybody I could. Yeah. And just the full sort of reporter story about it. Like, here's what Bret says, and here's what Bruce said, and I'll present both situations, and then I'll tell what I know about what really happened. And, you decide what's the real story. But I kind of present it in that, like a magazine, like, like, I don't know. I tried to write it in a very cinematic way.
Yeah, it came across well. That's why it's one of my favorite wrestling books, man. It's like, because you're very welcome. Like, and it's a neat time capsule, and I think it encompasses a lot of what's a valuable piece of wrestling history too. That a lot of people from like America probably aren't as familiar with it, and to like, totally not. And to get that kind of other perspective of like how they like. People up in Calgary influence the wrestling business as a whole is such a fascinating aspect of it all.
Most people from America, the only thing they know about it is when it gets mentioned via Bret or Owen, right? Or I mean, I think when Bret and Owen had their feud there for a while, and Stu and Helen were in the audience there, and Jerry Lawler was making fun of them and stuff, and that sort of thing. That's what introduced a lot of people to Stampede Wrestling and the history of the Hart family and everything. But they only saw that sort of angle of it. So I wanted, and I knew that it was this amazing territory that actually contributed a lot to wrestling and sort of an unsung hero of wrestling almost. And so that's why I wanted to tell the story from like the full story.
Yeah. Ultimately, how long did it take? Was this process for you to write the book and get it published and all that? How long did this ultimately take you when you were like, okay, yeah, I'm writing a book, and till it got published?
I think it was like I did about 2.5, 3 years of just researching it, just doing interviews, and it was sort of my hobby on the weekends and everything. I'd find a new wrestler and track them down and do an interview with them, and then suddenly I got the deal. I got the book deal then. Nice. And so then suddenly I had a crazy month, like 6 months I had to deliver it or something. So it was nuts. 4 months for my first draft. It almost killed me. And I had all this research. I still had so many interviews that I had to chase down and everything as well. And suddenly I just had this insane deadline to finish the book at that time. So I'm going to say it was about 3.5 years in the works. I wish I had more time. Like I wish I had more time to write it, because there's so many more interviews I would have liked to do. There's so many. I love the book and I'm real proud of it and I'm happy with it. I say it's my baby before I had babies,
Yeah.
But there's all, you know, you always look back and think I could have done this or that better. And I wish I would have had more time to flesh out some even more interviews and just get more perspectives. And, you know, I wish I had 300 more pages to write the thing as well, you know?
If you could, who would you have wanted to get like a big one that you're like, dang it, I wish I would have got more from his perspective? Or
like I never got to talk to Harley Race. I tried and tried, but I never was able to nail down Harley Race. I would love to talk to Harley Race, man. And it was doable, but then once the deadline came down and suddenly I got to write this thing, I can't spend too much time. I don't have my weekends free now to just chase around wrestlers and interview them. So eventually I had to say, okay, I've got what I need. Now I got to start writing. Or there's some stuff like I didn't do a very great interview with Archie the Stomper Goldie. I don't think he, you know, one of my great sources in the book is this guy, Bob Leonard, who is like the official Stampede wrestling photographer.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I remember his
photos are amazing. His photos are all through the book. And then he promoted shows like in Regina for Stu and everything as well. And so he was tight with the family, and he was really good buddies with Archie, and he got me Archie's number, and I phoned Archie and stuff. But I think Archie sort of had that kayfabe mentality still, and he was getting older too, and he didn't want it. Like you could tell, like he didn't give me anything that, he didn't give me a great interview, you know, and I wish I could have gone back to him and gotten a really great interview with him, you know. I wish I had time to fly around a different place. Like I wish I would have had the resources to actually go to places. Because I think if I would have got Archie face to face, sitting there in his living room, he would have opened up to me a lot more than talking on the phone and asking him, hey, what did you really think of Bruce Hart? You know? And because you know, he didn't want to tell me, and I know that he didn't always appreciate Hart, you know, Bruce Hart, you know.
Right, sure.
But anyway, there's things like that I would have liked to have done, you know. And there's just certain people that I wish I had talked to that, but for the most part, I'm real happy with the way it turned out.
You really should be, man. You really should be. Is there any like what are you up to now? Basically, tell the listeners.
Well, I'm not in the newspaper business anymore. I kind of it's a, you know, in the internet age, it's a sinking ship. Basically, I felt like I was on the Titanic, so I jumped off. I'm not in the newspaper business anymore. I'm not a rock critic anymore. Anything like that. I work for the University of Calgary. I handle their media and communications, and that's what I do for the most part, you know. And I do have some interest in, somebody wants to develop a TV show about pain and passion. So I keep in touch with that sort of thing, and hopefully that can develop. So,
oh man, that would be something.
We'll see what happens with that. But you know, I don't want to get my hopes up too high either. I've got a lot of friends that are authors that have had so many deals that just sit on the shelf for years and years and nothing ever happens. But who knows? I do think it would be an amazing movie. I know it would be an amazing movie if it got told right. I know it would be an incredible TV series. Like, I wrote it with a cinematic thought in mind. And like I say, Godfather of wrestling, Boogie Nights of wrestling, it is.
100%. Boogie Nights is an awesome comparison too. I didn't make that connection, but that's perfect. That is perfect. Yeah. So awesome, Heath. You know what? Thank you so much for joining me today.
I really enjoyed it.
Been awesome breaking it down with you. It's such a fascinating aspect of the business that I think needs to be covered more. And I appreciate you taking the time to do it with me.
I appreciate you asking me. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Is there anything you want to plug in general, like whether it's Twitter, social media, anything in regards to what you're up to?
I appreciate you asking, but I'm not that. I mean, my Twitter handle is Van Heaven. You know, no, not really. I mean, by the
book, yeah.
ECW Press, Amazon. You can get the book in these places. It still sells. Yeah, 2005 it was published, and then 2007 there was a new edition which included the death of Benoit and everything.
Yeah.
And you know, that's a lot of years from now, and I still have people like you approaching me about it. It still sells. I'm not gonna get rich off it, but it's still selling. There's people that want to make like a TV series about it. It's still alive. It's still alive and kicking. This many years later. So I want people to buy it. I always wanted it not just to sell to wrestling fans too. Because I wrote it in this cinematic way, and I think it's a really amazing human interest story. I always thought this could, you know, really penetrate with people that aren't just wrestling fans. You don't need to be a wrestling fan to love the book. I don't think it's a family drama in a lot of ways.
Right.
So yeah, ECW Press and Amazon and Amazon.com and wherever else. I just would encourage people to pick it up and buy it.
You know what? That's an interesting thing. You know, I have a couple friends that like I always know, oh, what are you reading? You know, anything like that, and we kind of like, oh, unofficial book club maybe kind of thing. So
Yeah.
what I might do is give it to a friend. She doesn't know wrestling at all, but maybe I'll see if she'll read it and get her insight on it. Oh.
Yeah, when women who don't even like there's women that like wrestling, but then when women who don't like wrestling have read the book, there's only been a few of these that I know of, but when women who don't like wrestling read the book, and then they came to me and said, that was an awesome book. Like, that's such a great compliment.
I bet that's got to even be better hearing it from a non-fan than like, because you're like reaching out and making it more of a connection for everybody in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. I always think of the movie The Wrestler, like that broke through to a mainstream market that didn't necessarily love wrestling. They just loved that movie because it was such a beautiful movie. And that's what I think is the potential for this book if it would just get into more people's hands. So.
Yeah. Well, we'll try to make it happen.
All right.
I'll promote the hell out of it on WrestleZone here, and we'll get it cooking for you again.
Thanks, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. All right, everybody, this is Don McDangelo. You can follow me on Twitter at Don McDangelo. You can follow WrestleZone on Twitter at WrestleZone.com, and then go to WrestleZone.com for all your news needs. And Heath, thanks again, man.
Thanks. I really appreciate it.
All right, we'll see you guys later.